Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Cut Rate Commander, the series in which we take a look at low-price commanders and make budget decks with them. My name is Grazzet, and today we'll be looking at the Gnomish Artificer, Oswald Fiddlebender. Before we continue, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this content and would like me to continue making more videos like this in the future. Also, be sure to stick around until the end of the video for the lineup of the upcoming deck techs. So with that out of the way, let's start by taking a look at the commander and playstyle. Oswald Fiddlebender is a 2/2 Gnome Artificer that costs 1 and a white and has the following ability. Pay a white, tap Oswald, and sacrifice an artifact. Search your library for an artifact card with mana value equal to 1 plus the sacrificed artifact's mana value, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Activate only as a sorcery. While sporting a low-to-the-ground CMC and a typical stat block for the cost, this commander's all about that activated ability, giving us a birthing pod effect in white, which is absolutely insane. While arguably not being as good as the original pod due to only fetching artifacts and being limited to white, which is a huge downside in and of itself at the moment, Oswald is still an on-demand tutor effect in our command zone that can get us all our artifacts into play for only a single white mana, which again is still an amazing effect despite its restrictions. Looking at this ability at its most basic, it allows us to climb into bigger and bigger artifacts throughout the course of the game, making it a substantial source of value for us. The ability to turn a CMC 0 artifact, artifact land, or artifact token into a Soul Ring, Wayfarer's Bauble, or even Esper Sentinel on command is spectacular, and only gets better as we climb up the chain, allowing us to fetch removal options, combo pieces, or just huge beaters, all of which is available to us right from our command zone. So as you may have guessed, this build will be focusing on making the most out of Oswald's ability, both from a value and combo enabling standpoint. From the value side, we'll be running plenty of small low-cost artifacts to generate us value as we bring them into play or send them to the grave, ranging from drawing us cards, fetching us up lands, or recurring artifacts from the grave back to hand, while also running plenty of active support pieces that will generate us even more value as said artifacts enter and leave play or as we cast them from our hand. But value itself doesn't win games on its own, so we'll be relying on Oswald to fetch us some combo win conditions for us as we expand our board states normally, fetching us up cards that are great on their own but deadly when used in conjunction with each other for various effects, ranging from infinite mana generation to pump into our mana sinks up to infinite damage to wipe out all our opponents all at once. And since this build will also be running plenty of sources of artifact recursion and reanimation, keeping our wincons away from us will be very difficult for our opponents. So let's get the workshop ready and make sure that Oswald has all the tools he needs, because he's about to change our opponent's opinions on mono-white commanders one artifact at a time. So now that we know a bit more about the commander and playstyle, let's start looking at the deck itself by starting with the creatures. Skipping straight to the CMC 2 slot, we have its single entry with Mere Retriever, a 1/1 that returns another artifact from our grave back to hand when it dies, making it the first of many artifact recursion pieces to get extra value out of our bin as we sack them to climb into bigger artifacts. The CMC 3 slot then continues with the artifact recursion plan with Junk Diver, Workshop Assistant, and Scrap Trawler. Junk Diver and Workshop Assistant both return another artifact from our grave back to hand when they die, the former being a 1/1 flyer and the latter being a 1/2, serving as an additional copy of Mere Retriever and can all fetch each other up for a continual chain of value as we sack them. Scrap Trawler is a 3/2 that, whenever it or another artifact is put into our grave, returns another artifact from it with lesser CMC back to our hand, synergizing perfectly with our commander by retrieving previously sacked artifacts back to hand as we continue to climb into larger ones. We're also running some artifact reanimation with Scarecrow, a 1/2 that we can pay 1 in sack to draw a card, or pay 4 and tap it to return target artifact creature from our grave back into play, giving us a repeatable source of artifact reanimation, especially once we start climbing higher into our artifact chain, as well as having the added benefit of being able to sack itself for card advantage in response to removal or a wipe. Then we have some more artifacts joining us with Foundry Inspector, Shimmermere, and Mere Welder. Foundry Inspector is a 3/2 that reduces the cost of all our artifacts by 1, making it a straightforward piece of cost reduction to help us play our artifacts that we draw into that much quicker. Shimmermere is a 2/2 with Flash that also lets us cast all our artifacts at flash speed, providing us with some nice flexibility by allowing us to play both itself and our other artifacts out of nowhere on our opponent's turns. Mere Welder is a 1/4 that we can tap to exile an artifact from our graveyard, granting all its activated abilities to Mere Welder, giving us not only a way to make further use of abilities on cards that we can't easily get back, but also serving as a combo piece that we'll touch on a bit later. Then we end this slot with a pair of non-artifact creatures, those being Dig Site Engineer and Lochelle Clockwork Scholar. Dig Site Engineer is a 3/3 that lets us pay 2 whenever we cast an artifact to create a 0/0 artifact token that has +1/+1 power for each artifact we control, providing us with a steady stream of bodies that just keep growing and growing as our board gets bigger and bigger. Loshil is a 2/4 that prevents all damage to our attacking artifacts and draws us a card whenever one or more artifacts enters play under our control once per turn, effectively adding draw 1 to our commander's effect while in play and preventing our opponents from blocking and trading with our creatures in combat effectively. The CMC 4 slot is up next, starting us off with some colorless entries in the form of Solemn Simulacrum, Joyrous Familiar, and Dross Scorpion. Solemn Simulacrum is a 2/2 that puts a basic land from our deck into play tapped when it ETBs and draws us a card when it dies, making it a near-perfect artifact to climb into then out of to give us some ramp and card draw in the process. Joyrous Familiar is a 2/2 flyer that reduces the cost of all our historic spells by 1, giving us another cost reduction source for our artifacts, but being evasive to facilitate us using it to swing in as well. Dross Scorpion is a 3/1 that, whenever it or another artifact creature is put into our graveyard, lets us untap an artifact, on its own netting us some extra uses out of our artifact's activated abilities as we sack creatures to our commander, but also serves as a combo piece for us, which we'll be covering shortly. Then we close out this slot with a pair of white creatures, those being Sanctum Gargoyle and Tishar, Ancestor's Apostle. Sanctum Gargoyle is a 2/3 flyer that returns an artifact from our grave back to hand when it ETBs, giving us yet another artifact recursion piece, though this one is a bit faster since it triggers on ETB instead of death, with the added benefit of also being evasive to get in for some damage. Tishar is a 2/2 flyer that, whenever we cast a historic spell, puts target creature with CMC 3 or less from our grave back into play, stapling on a small reanimation effect to all our artifact spells to bring back a good chunk of our utility creatures, who can then in turn recur even bigger artifacts for even more value. Moving on to the CMC 5 slot, we have its 3 members with Bronze Guardian, Cataclysmic Gearhulk, and Thopter Squadron. Bronze Guardian is a star 5 with double strike, Ward 2, grants all our other artifacts Ward 2, and whose power is equal to the amount of artifacts we control, making it both a potent source of damage and a passable source of protection for our board from targeted removal. Cataclysmic Gearhulk is a 4/5 with Vigilance that, when it ETBs, has each player select an artifact, creature, enchantment, and planeswalker from among non-lands they control, and then has them sack the rest, giving us a board wipe that we can tutor into play with our commander, and leaves both our commander and itself on board to be sacked into something bigger after the dust clears. Thopter Squadron is a 0/0 flyer that comes into play with 3 +1/+1 counters and, at sorcery speed, lets us pay 1 and remove a counter from it to create a 1/1 flying artifact token, or sack that token to put a 1/1 counter back on Thopter Squadron, making it a mediocre flyer at best on its own, but its ability to sack the tokens it creates being very useful for us to enable some combos. The CMC 6 slot then brings us another trio of creatures with Sun Titan, Steel Hellkite, and Triskelion. Sun Titan is a 6/6 with Vigilance that, whenever it ETBs or attacks, puts a permanent with CMC value 3 or less from our grave back into play, granting us another source of low CMC reanimation, which we'll definitely have use for by the time it hits the board alongside its sturdy stat line. Steel Hellkite is a 5/5 flyer that lets us pay 2 to give it +1/+0 until end of turn, in addition to letting us pay X if it dealt combat damage to a player to destroy each non-land permanent they own with CMC equal to X once per turn, making it a big evasive body that can handily pick apart our opponent's boards, and whose fire-breathing effect can be used to instantly kill one opponent with infinite damage once we're able to generate infinite colorless mana. Triskelion is a 1/1 who comes into play with 3 +1/+1 counters and lets us remove a counter from it to deal 1 damage to any target, giving us a subpar stat line and passable removal effect for the cost, but crucially being a part of an infinite damage combo that'll help us wipe out the entire table all at once. Almost at the end now, the CMC 7 slot brings us another pair of artifacts with Angel of the Ruins and Pentavus. Angel of the Ruins is a 5/7 flyer that exiles up to 2 target artifacts or enchantments when it ETBs, as well as having plane cycling for 2, letting us pitch it early for a land if we need it, or serving as a big evasive body with removal attached to bring up with Oswald in the later game. Pentavus is a 0/0 that comes into play with 5 +1/+1 counters and lets us pay 1 to either remove a counter from it to create a 1/1 artifact token with flying, or sack one of those tokens to put a +1/+1 counter back on Pentavus, effectively making it a larger, more expensive copy of Thopter Squadron that's mainly going to be used for its combo potential. Finally, reaching the CMC 8 slot, we come to our last creature with Colossus of Akros, a 10/10 with Defender, Indestructible, and Monstrosity 10 that also gains Trample and can attack as though it didn't have Defender once it becomes monstrous, giving us a huge hard-to-remove top end to climb into with our commander that can easily turn itself into a 20/20 with Trample to help us close out games quickly in the event that our combo wins fail us. That covers all our creatures, so let's move on to our instance. Starting off in the CMC 1 slot, we have a pair of removal spells with Dispatch and Swords to Plowshares. Dispatch allows us to tap a creature or exile it instead if we have 3 or more artifacts in play, usually serving as an exile removal effect thanks to our artifact-heavy playstyle. Swords to Plowshares also exiles target creature, but also has its controller gain life equal to its power, a price that we're more than willing to pay for an instant speed exile effect for only a single white mana. Then skipping to the CMC 3 slot, we have Generous Gift, which destroys target permanent at the cost of giving its controller a 3/3 to replace it, giving us a stable removal option to deal with almost any type of permanent threat with minimal downside. Reaching the CMC 4 slot, we have our final instant entry with Crush Contraband, which has us either exile an artifact or enchantment, or both, making it a fairly priced 2-for-1 back row removal option for us. That covers all our instance, so let's move on to our sorceries. Jumping all the way to the CMC 6 slot, we have our only 2 sorceries with Austere Command and Open the Vaults. Austere Command has us choose 2 of the following 4 options: destroy all artifacts, destroy all enchantments, destroy all creatures with CMC 3 or less, or destroy all creatures with CMC 4 or greater, providing us with a very customizable wipe to hobble our opponent's boards while mitigating the effect it has on ours. Open the Vaults returns all artifacts and enchantments from all graveyards back into play under their owner's control, making it a mass reanimation effect that also helps our opponents but will benefit us significantly more considering our commander will be loading up our graveyard with artifacts throughout the course of the game. That covers all our sorceries, and since we don't have any enchantments in this build, we'll be skipping straight to our artifacts. Beginning in the CMC 0 slot, we have its 2 members with Everflowing Chalice and Tormod's Crypt. Everflowing Chalice has Multi-Kicker 2, allowing us to put a charge counter on it every time it was kicked, and can be tapped to generate 1 colorless mana for each charge counter on it, making it an early play that we can turn into a 1-drop with our commander, or serve as a huge mana rock later when we can pump mana into it. Tormod's Crypt lets us tap it and sack it to exile all cards from target player's graveyard, making it a potent piece of graveyard hate that's easily recurable with our artifact recursion, as well as being easily played early to climb into something bigger. Speaking of which, the CMC 1 slot starts us off with some potent choices to climb into with Soul Ring, Voltaic Key, and Elixir of Immortality. Soul Ring can be tapped for 2 colorless, making it a superb choice of ramp that we can often even justify sacking an artifact land to tutor into play for the sheer amount of mana it provides. Voltaic Key lets us pay 1 and tap it to untap target artifact, making it a good way to get extra uses out of our tap effects and even our commander if we're able to turn him into an artifact, in addition to being part of some combos to generate us infinite mana and artifact untapping. Elixir of Immortality lets us pay 2 and tap it to gain 5 life and shuffle both it and our graveyard back into our deck, allowing us to reload our deck with targets for Oswald's tutoring to hit alongside some life gain as a small bonus. Some artifacts we want to sack for others are up next with Implement of Improvement, Chromatic Star, and Terrarian, all 3 letting us draw a card when they're put into our graveyard from play, the first letting us pay a white and sack it to gain 2 life, the second letting us pay 1, tap it and sack it to generate a mana of any color, and the last coming into play tapped and letting us pay 2, tap it and sack it to generate 2 mana of any color. All of their activated abilities being largely irrelevant, as their main purpose is to enable Oswald to sack them to climb into a 2-drop and get us a card in the process. Another example of this would be Origin Spellbomb, which lets us pay 1, tap it and sack it to put a 1/1 artifact into play, and gives us the option to pay a white to draw a card when it's sent to the grave from the field, usually being used as a stepping stone to climb into a 2-drop with, but can be used for its ability if we need a CMC 0 body to climb into a 1-drop with. Then we end this slot with Portable Hole and Codex Shredder. Portable Hole exiles a non-land permanent of CMC 2 or less when it ETBs until it leaves the field, making it a mini O-ring effect that can slow down our opponent's early game by hitting mana rocks or dorks until we use it to climb into something bigger. Codex Shredder lets us tap it to mill a player for 1, or we can pay 5, tap it and sack it to return any card from our grave back to our hand, which we're mainly going to be using as a combo piece, but is still serviceable on its own as an expensive piece of graveyard recursion that brings back anything from our graveyard back to hand. The CMC2 slot then starts us off with some card draw sources in the form of Eye of Vecna, Endless Atlas, and Ichor Wellspring. Eye of Vecna has us draw a card and lose 2 life when it ETBs, then lets us pay 2 life to draw a card on each of our upkeeps, giving us a decent source of card advantage that we can easily climb into with our commander. Endless Atlas lets us pay 2 and tap it to draw a card if we have 3 or more lands in play with the same name, a condition we can easily fulfill thanks to being a monocolored deck for some more easily searchable card advantage. Ichor Wellspring draws us a card when it ETBs or is put into the grave, making it an ideal target to climb into if we want to keep climbing the artifact chain with our commander and get some card advantage out of it while we do so. More artifacts to climb into and out of join us next with Mycosynth Wellspring, Prophetic Prism, and Servo Schematic. Mycosynth Wellspring puts a basic land from our deck into our hand when it ETBs or goes to the grave, making sure we hit our land drops as we climb into bigger artifacts. Prophetic Prism draws us a card when it ETBs, and we can pay 1 and tap it to generate a mana of any color, giving us yet another artifact that replaces itself as it enters or leaves play. Servo Schematic creates a 1/1 artifact token when it ETBs or goes to the grave, providing us both with its CMC2 body to sack, but also 2 CMC0 bodies in case we need to tutor up some of our CMC1 artifacts as well. Some pieces of ramp then join us past the halfway mark with Liquid Metal Torque, Mind Stone, and Prismatic Lens. Liquid Metal Torque taps for a colorless and also lets us tap it to make target non-land into an artifact until the end of the turn, giving us both ramp and a way to turn our commander into an artifact himself to take advantage of any artifact untapping effects we may have in play, possibly allowing him to use his ability multiple times per turn. Mind Stone taps for a colorless and we can pay 1, tap it and sack it to draw a card, making it a mana rock that we can sack in the event that we need extra draw. Prismatic Lens also taps for a colorless, and we can pay 1 and tap it to produce a mana of any color, giving us another mana rock to ramp us in the early game that we can trade in for something bigger later. Then closing out this slot, we have Swiftfoot Boots, Jandor Saddlebags, and Crown of Empires. Swiftfoot Boots is an equipment that equips for 1 and grants the equipped creature hexproof and haste, making it the perfect source of protection for our commander that we can and absolutely should be searching for as soon as possible to prevent our opponents from removing Oswald and interrupting our game plan. Jandor Saddlebags lets us pay 3 and tap it to untap target creature, giving us another searchable way to enable activating our commander multiple times per turn to speed up our game plan. Crown of Empires lets us pay 3 and tap it to either tap a creature or instead gain control of it if we also control Scepter of Empires and Throne of Empires, not being very good on its own, but granting us a potent and repeatable theft effect once its 2 other set pieces are brought into play, which is something our commander can facilitate greatly. Up next is the CMC3 slot and some combo pieces with Basalt Monolith, Rings of Brighthearth, and Staff of Domination. Basalt Monolith doesn't untap during our untap step, taps for 3 colorless, and lets us pay 3 to untap it, giving us a big mana boost on its own and can be used in conjunction with our artifact untapping effects or other pieces to generate even more or potentially infinite mana. Speaking of which, Rings of Brighthearth lets us pay 2 whenever we activate a non-mana ability to copy it, synergizing spectacularly with our commander to get 2 for 1 value every time we activate him, as well as being part of various combos to help us close out games. Staff of Domination lets us pay 1 to untap itself, pay 2 and tap it to gain a life, pay 3 and tap it to untap target creature, pay 4 and tap it to tap target creature, and pay 5 and tap it to draw a card, which is a perfectly serviceable mana sink on its own, but allows us to gain infinite life card draw and creature untaps once we have the infinite mana to go into it. Then we close out this slot with Puppet Strings and Scepter of Empires. Puppet Strings lets us pay 2 and tap it to either tap or untap target creature, giving us another way to untap Oswald for more uses or tap down our opponent's creatures if needed. Scepter of Empires lets us tap it to deal 1 damage to a player, or 3 damage instead if we control Crown of Empires and Throne of Empires. Its burn ability usually not being very impressive even if it's powered up, but actually works perfectly with our artifact untap combos to kill all our opponents through infinite damage. Reaching the CMC4 slot, we have its pair of members with Empowered Auto Generator and Throne of Empires. Empowered Auto Generator comes into play tapped and puts a charge counter on itself whenever we tap it, then producing X mana of any one color equal to the amount of charge counters on it, making it a ramp source that just keeps getting bigger and bigger over time that also serves as a combo piece for a few of our infinite mana combos. Throne of Empires lets us pay 1 and tap it to create a 1/1, or instead create 5 1/1s if we control Crown of Empires and Scepter of Empires. being okay on its own to get us some extra bodies on board, but being able to quickly flood the board when the set is assembled, or even get us infinite tokens created when we set up infinite untaps and infinite mana. Moving on to the CMC 5 slot, we have its 3 members with Cauldron of Souls, Mirrorworks, and Uggin's Nexus. Cauldron of Souls can be tapped to grant any number of our creatures persist until end of turn, making it a decent way to protect our creatures from wipes and gain extra value out of them by being able to sack them an additional time, while also being part of a combo kill as a bonus. Mirrorworks lets us pay 2 whenever a non-token artifact ETBs under our control to create a token copy of it, getting us some insane value out of our commander by doubling the artifacts he fetches for us every time for a minuscule cost. Uggin's Nexus has any extra turn spells cause their owners to skip that turn instead, and when it's sent from the field to the grave, lets us take an extra turn ourselves, exiling itself in the process, making it the perfect 5-drop to climb into a 6-drop with and get us an extra turn in the exchange. Finally, reaching the CMC 6 slot and our last artifact, we have Staff of Nin, which draws us a card at the beginning of each of our upkeeps and lets us tap it to deal a damage to any target, making it a okay if expensive source of card draw with some minor removal attached, but can again be used to combo kill with infinite untaps, which is why we're running it. That covers all our artifacts, and since we have no planeswalkers in this build, let's move on straight into our land base. We'll start off with a trio of artifact lands in the form of Ancient Den, Darksteel Citadel, and Power Depot, the first tapping for a white, the second for a colorless and being indestructible, and the last coming into play tapped, having modular 1, tapping for a colorless, or instead any color that can only be used to cast artifact spells or activate artifact abilities, each of them playing a role as a regular land as well as synergizing well with our artifact-heavy playstyle while enabling Oswald to sack them to climb into something bigger if needed. For utility lands, we'll be running Buried Ruin and Ghost Quarter. Buried Ruin taps for a colorless and we can pay 2, tap it and sack it to return an artifact from our grave back to hand, giving us another piece of artifact recursion, this time in the land slot. Ghost Quarter taps for a colorless and we can tap it and sack it to destroy target land, giving its controller a basic from their deck to replace it, making it a good source of spot removal for our opponent's utility lands. Lastly, we're running 31 planes as our basics to fill out our land base. So now that we've covered all the cards in the deck, let's take a look at some of the combos. Starting with our most straightforward combo, we'll need Basalt Monolith, Rings of Brighthearth, and 2 free open mana of any color to generate infinite mana. To accomplish this, we'll need to first tap Basalt Monolith to generate 3 colorless, then use that mana to have it untap itself. Rings of Brighthearth will see the activated ability for the untap effect and allow us to pay 2 to copy it. The copied ability will resolve first, allowing us to untap the monolith, which we will then immediately tap again to generate 3 more colorless. Then the original untap effect will resolve, leaving us with an untapped monolith and 1 more mana than we started off with, allowing us to repeat the process to generate infinite mana. From here, we can pump that mana into a mana sink like Staff of Domination for the infinite life gain creature untaps and draw it provides, or Steel Hellkite, which we can pump its power to infinity and then body an opponent that can't block it. We can then expand on this combo by adding Codex Shredder to the mix, following the previous steps to generate infinite mana, then using Codex Shredder's second ability to sack itself and return a card back from our grave. Rings of Brighthearth will see this ability, then allow us to pay 2 to copy it, letting us use the copied ability to bring any card we want back to hand, while using the original to bring Codex Shredder itself back, now generating us infinite graveyard recursion alongside infinite mana. Moving from one infinite mana combo to another, this one also adds infinite artifact untaps by using Pentavis, Draw Scorpion, and Basalt Monolith. To start, we tap the monolith to generate 3 colorless, using 1 of that mana to have Pentavis create a 1/1 token. Using a second mana, we'll then have Pentavis sack that token, triggering Draw Scorpion to untap Basalt Monolith, again leaving us with 1 more mana than we started off with, and allowing Draw Scorpion to untap all our artifacts continually so long as we keep pumping mana into Pentavis. From here, we can add an artifact that taps to win the game, such as Codex Shredder to mill out all our opponents, Throne of Empires to create infinite tokens, or Staff of Nin or Scepter of Empires to deal infinite damage. Also keep in mind that Pentavis can be swapped out for Thopter Squadron for the same effect, albeit at sorcery speed, and Basalt Monolith can be swapped out for either Everflowing Chalice or Empowered Auto Generator so long as they can produce at least 3 mana. Then we have another infinite mana and artifact untap combo with Everflowing Chalice, Rings of Brighthearth, and Voltaic Key, which requires the chalice to tap for at least 4 mana in order for it to work properly. First, we tap the chalice for 4+ mana, then pay 1 of those to tap the key to untap the chalice. Rings of Brighthearth then lets us pay 2 to copy the key's untapping effect to let it untap itself, netting us 1+ mana in the process and untapping all our pieces so we can repeat it for infinite mana and infinite artifact untaps. Additionally, we can also swap out Everflowing Chalice for Empowered Auto Generator so long as it also taps for 4+ mana. A graveyard-focused combo is up next, requiring Mere Welder, Basalt Monolith, Staff of Domination, and 2 open mana, requiring both the Monolith and Staff to be in the grave. Tapping the Mirror, we exile Staff of Domination first, giving its abilities to the Mirror. We then spend 1 mana to untap it, then tap it again to exile the Monolith, getting its abilities as well. Using our last mana, we untap the Mirror again, who can now tap for 3 and untap itself, as well as activating any of the other Staff's abilities to generate us infinite life, infinite card draw, and infinite creature untaps. Finally, we get to our last combo, an infinite damage one featuring Triskelion, Draw Scorpion, and Cauldron of Souls. To start off, we'll tap the Cauldron to give our creatures persist, then we'll remove 2 counters from Triskelion to have it deal 2 damage to target player, then removing its last counter to have it deal 1 damage to itself, which kills it. Draw Scorpion will see this and let us untap our Cauldron of Souls, while Triskelion will come back into play with a -1/-1 counter thanks to persist, which is then cancelled out by one of the +1/+1 counters it comes into play with, allowing us to give it persist again. And from there we can repeat this process to have it deal infinite damage to all our opponents. So with all our combos covered, let's move on to the breakdown. This deck currently has 25 creatures including the Commander, 4 instants, 2 sorceries, 0 enchantments, 34 artifacts, 0 planeswalkers, and 35 lands. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 57 artifacts, 18 cards that care about artifacts, 6 cards that cantrip on ETB or death, 6 sources of artifact recursion, 4 sources of artifact reanimation, and 5 sources of untapping, giving us an impressive pool of artifacts that we can climb into with our commander, alongside plenty of cards that synergize with artifacts as well as returning them to either our hand or the field, and also including a handful of ways to get our commander untapped to get extra uses out of him throughout the course of the game. For general deck stats, we have 10 ramp sources, 7 card draw sources, 10 targeted removal sources, and 3 board wipes, being a bit lighter on draw than normal since our commander is able to tutor up our draw pieces directly into play, while having a typical ratio of ramp, targeted removal, and wipes. Looking at our mana curve, we have 2 0 drops, 11 1 drops, 14 2 drops, 15 3 drops, 8 4 drops, 6 5 drops, 6 6 drops, 2 7 drops, and 1 8 drop, giving us a mid-range curve with plenty of low CMC artifacts to drop early and climb into bigger ones with our commander or play from hand throughout the course of the game. Currently, this deck is valued at $64.54, not counting the price of basic lands or shipping. This price was calculated by using the cheapest listed marketplace price on TCG Player at the time of this recording. For side grades, Duplicant, Meteor Golem, and Spine of Isha all make great removal to climb into with Oswald to deal with our opponent's threats while we climb into something bigger. Faith's Reward, Brought Back, and Savine's Reclamation are all great white spells to get our artifacts back into play as we sack them or later on for additional value. And finally, Cathodian and Mere Moon Vessel can serve as ramped as we use them to climb into bigger artifacts to help us cast our cards from hand. For upgrades, Esper Sentinel, Either Sworn Canonist, and Archaeomancer's Map are white artifacts that all provide great utility for our deck, with card draw, slowdown, and ramp respectively. 1000-Year Elixir, Mage Right Stone, and Umbral Mantle all offer us ways to untap our commander to get extra uses out of his ability. Illusionist's Bracers gives us additional copies of our commander's ability, letting us sack 1 artifact and get 2 in return. Urza's Saga and Treasure Vault are great lands that synergize well with our artifact-heavy playstyle with their token creation. Cauldron Complete and Wormcoil Engine both make great threats to tutor up with our commander. And Blasting Station, Kark Clan Ironworks, and Sensei's Divining Top are great additions to expand our combo roster in various ways. Finally, if your pockets run deep, you may want to consider adding Metalworker, Grim Monolith, and Mox Diamond for the premium mana ramp they provide, along with the premium price tag they carry. Thanks everyone for sticking around until the end of the video. Again, thanks to all of you, the channel has broken the 1400 sub milestone despite my time away. So once again, I'd like to thank all of you for all of your support, as this channel would be unable to grow without you. Taking a look at the results of last week's poll, it looks like Old Stickfingers came out on top of a close race, so look forward to a graveyard-focused build featuring him next week. Moving on to the next poll, we'll be putting a fresh batch of commanders from Innistrad for you to vote for, this time featuring Ludwig Necrogenius, Slugurk the Overslime, and Catilda Dawnheart Prime. Be sure to cast your vote in the poll in the description. Also, let me know in the comments what commanders from Innistrad you'd like to have the opportunity to vote for in an upcoming episode. And with that, have a good one folks, and stay safe.